Hi, everyone. So thanks very much for coming to the breakout session. We'll be discussing young people, which, as I'm sure you're all aware, has been a real hot topic. When it comes to employability and AI, we'll be aiming to kind of cut through some of the speculation that is written and spoken about this in relation to AI, but also some of the bigger questions around young people, NEETs, employability, and so on. So I've got a really fantastic panel joining me today. Anne-Marie Imafidon, is that correct? Imafidon, who is a social entrepreneur, founder of Stemettes, chair of the Institute for the Future of Work, and was also announced as co-lead for Women in Tech Task Force alongside Secretary of State Liz Kendall. So very nice to have you with us. Jessie, Leigh, the Work and Health Programme lead for NHS across Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. So you'll be able to talk about peripheral economies and some of the kind of beyond London questions that are really key to these discussions. Ewan, Bennie, who's Director of Communications and Influence at EY Foundation. You're doing some really great projects in conjunction with the Institute for the Future of Work. So we'll be talking a little bit about that and how to get young people from diverse backgrounds into employment. Oliver Nash, formerly at Google and DSIT, and now a director at the Future of Work, who's a specialist on workforce data and has also been working on some of those really interesting projects on the ground to get young people into work. And we also have Gabriel Okafor, is that correct? Okafor, who is an alumna of the EY's Foundation Programme and is giving us a voice from young people for the panel. So thanks very much for joining us. We will be bringing this to questions after about half an hour of chat. So please have your questions ready, and we'd like to make it a kind of interactive panel. So I'm going to start with you, Anne-Marie. You've obviously been working with Stemettes. You work directly with young people, especially young women. And you spend a lot of time talking to young people about their aspirations, about how that's changed, about how they might feel about AI and careers in AI and technology. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how that has changed over time and what kind of trends you've noticed in how young people conceive of their careers in tech or otherwise, and how AI is kind of playing into that at the moment.
Sure, and excited to be back on stage talking about this in particular. Young people are my favourite thing to speak about, to talk to hear from, and to engage with, especially in a conversation like this. I think access to technology and seeing themselves as technologists, we had this notion of kind of identity earlier on in the day, is something I've seen it definitely kind of transformed over time, how they see whether they're able to be those innovators versus what the nature is of innovation that they want to bring about as they step into the workplace. So I think that's one thing that we've seen as kind of transformed. The other thing that's been maybe a little bit more steady is a definition of success. And it's been so interesting how AI has kind of coloured that in ever so slightly differently over the last kind of 5 years, of folks wanting to build a career that is about people, planet, and profit, right? And so wanting to be as sustainable and as kind of good in the way that they have work and the impact of the work and the employment that they have. But what's been transformative has been kind of AI as something that actually for a lot of young people, the initial engagements they've had with AI has not been what we've seen as folks already working. It's been deep fakes, it's been all kinds of things happening kind of in schools and around schools and in their engagement with friends that has meant that they've ended up, and you can't say all young people because not all of them are the same and not all of them have the same access to AI, but they've ended up being able to maybe question it a lot more than the adults have in their initial engagements with AI. And so even without necessarily knowing, because they're not AI natives as well, as something we kind of used to have this term of digital native. We're definitely not seeing that all young people are AI natives at the moment, but definitely seeing that even if they don't know AI. I've never used it or kind of consciously gone on and logged in and used a particular platform in a particular way. That there is a reticence, there is a resistance, there is a frustration, there is a and it's not a fear of the unknown, it's a fear of the known AI that they've been able to see, that then has coloured what they think that might mean for if they were going to use AI in work. Separate too is AI, taking all the jobs that I would have had as an entry-level role, which is definitely something we hear not just from the young people, but from their parents as well, that's a real worry that they have. So I think there's been quite a few different kind of impacts on how young people see themselves, how they see their futures, and how they see what careers could be as a result of AI in particular as one of these, fourth industrial revolution technologies, because there are quite a few, kind of being more on their radar.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I find it really frustrating when I come across descriptions of the younger generation as simply AI natives, because it just does not reflect what I actually hear from young people or employers about that reality. Ewan, I'll move on to you now. So in your work at the EY Foundation, you've been kind of exploring and developing ways to make work more inclusive for young people. Can you tell us a bit about some of the initiatives that you have developed through that work and how they're kind of tangibly making a difference when it comes to AI or otherwise?
Sure. Yeah, so as a charity, so we're a young person charity. We support young people we use the phrase low-income backgrounds. The criteria we use for our programs are from eligibility for free school meals, and we provide employability skills training and paid work experience. And the audience that we work with, so over one in four young people eligible for free school meals. If you're from a free school meals background, you're twice as likely to be not in education, employment or training. So it's a group that I think are particularly at risk in terms of where things are potentially going, in terms of what's required in the changing nature of work. And some of the things that have been covered this morning really sort of resonate with some of the things that we've been looking at. So there's some kind of it seems like a real sort of consensus around the importance of sort of core human skills, those human-centric skills, so communication, resilience, leadership, critical thinking. I think there's still recognition of technical training, and there's this more specific digital skills. I think also just the changing nature of work and needing to pivot and adapt and not necessarily think you're in one role for a prolonged period of time, being able to sort of move around as you go into work. So there's kind of all these sort of things being done to, or potentially sort of being done to young people. And I guess from our perspective, we're really sort of concerned, and we really want to make sure that the young people that we work with and young people more broadly are able to really sort of actively engage from a bottom-up perspective, so things aren't just being done to them. And so a really big piece of work we've been doing with Institute for Future of Work and with Oliver is around different types of motivation. And so this is something that isn't a particularly AI-y sort of subject. It's kind of thing that probably, kind of existed forever. But different forms of motivation, as we've explored it with the Institute, are really sort of critical to a young person being able to sort of see themselves in the future of work. And so we've been particularly looking at intrinsic, so things that you do inherently for things you really enjoy and give you meaning, and also internalized forms of motivation, which is really connects to your core values. And that's not to say that those two are better necessarily. Extrinsic motivation is perhaps the one that's most commonly thought of in terms of sort of doing things for reward, whether money or status or things like that. But intrinsic and internalized have been really sort of overlooked, and the more that we've looked into those types of motivation, the more that we've seen that if you have them and if they're dialed up, it really helps a young person to see that the thing that they really care about, the things that they're really passionate about, how can they connect that to their potential future in work? And if they can make that connection, then you're really opening yourself up to learning those skills. You really actively want to learn, whether there's human-centric or technical, or being up for pivoting and developing and moving around different career opportunities. So it's quite a long answer to your question, but how motivation feels like really, really important for young people that we work with. And what's to the point of action, what we've been able to do is test, just quite a small scale pilot, but working with the young people that we support can you sort of train this type of motivation? Everyone's kind of born with these different types, but if you're from a low income background, on on average, that those types of motivation can reduce over time. But also what we found, which has been like really encouraging, is that it is trainable, and quite a simple training process, which Oliver might want to give a bit more detail on than I can really help a young person to engage with those types of motivation, and then to see their future in work, which is we're sort of seeing as, like I say, early stages in this testing, but has a lot of potential for those young people to just, like I say, meet these challenges on their own terms, and to sort of bring themselves to these things they're having to tackle.
Thanks. That's a much more tangible framing of that than some of the other takes I read a lot, which is just tell kids to do what they love, which sometimes doesn't always feel that helpful. Gabriel, I'll move on to you now, because you have been through some of these programs. Can you tell us a bit about how the experience kind of changed your confidence and your perspective when it came to approaching work?
Yeah, thank you all for coming, first of all. And I think that it was really transformational for me, because I had a really difficult upbringing. My father passed away in front of me, and I became homeless when I was in secondary school. So it was quite difficult to go to school and talk to people, because conversations mainly centered around what shoes you had, what games you had, where everyone else is going. And I didn't feel involved in those conversations. So I often felt like an imposter during that time. And it wasn't until sixth form where I was given the opportunity to join the EY Foundation on a program, and it was a paid work experience. And at the time, I did not think I was able to be part of that program, or did I have the intelligence to be part of that program. And I learned so many skills from there, skills to be able to speak to different partners, skills about confidence and resilience. Programs like the Smart Futures program really gave me the confidence to break that glass ceiling that I thought I had for myself, and it gave me the confidence to do the things that I'm doing now. I currently am doing a master's in international corporate governance, and I'm also building up a startup to help people who came from similar backgrounds to me and might not have the access to the skills that I did. So yeah.
Great. And we'll be hearing more about that, I'm sure, as the panel goes on. Jessie, you work in health and employability around young people in Cornwall and the Scilly Isles, and I mentioned the term earlier, peripheralised economy, which essentially means a kind of economy or region which is left out of national conversations about work. What are the kind of particular challenges here when we're thinking about young people getting employment and they're not in London or in major cities, and how are you kind of thinking and working around that?
Thank you. And thank you to the Institute of Future of Work for inviting the voice of a peripheral region onto the platform. Cornwall's a place that a lot of you will know, because we send 5 million visitors home happy every year. The risk of that is that the risk of kind of policymakers as holiday makers, who sort of feel that they understand our economy and our place because they had a nice visitor experience. We like to encourage people to kind of look beyond the postcard and remember that you can't eat the view. So we have a lot of people who live in quite deep poverty and deprivation in Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. It's one of the least developed regions of Europe still. And it's joined in that by a bunch of other regions in the UK, and they are mostly literally peripheral around the edge of the country. So we have a network called Britain's Leading Edge of upper tier local authority areas that do not have major cities within them. I think our largest, we don't actually have a town, or we didn't a few years ago have a town with a daytime population over 30,000, which surprised the government when they tried to do some Hyde Streets funding to help places like ours, and we weren't eligible. So it's an interesting place. And I did grow up in Cornwall as a child, and I followed the curve at a time when there was no university, and I had to go away. Loved it, stayed away, got to return as an adult, hopefully bring some useful skills. And that commonly still is the story. So these peripheral regions very often we must remember that they are growing the workforce for our cities as well as for their own regional economies. Cities benefit from a kind of influx of some of our brightest minds, and some of us get to go home later when we have children and expensive caring costs for the local authority. But yes, so the kind of experience that young people have matters not just for our region, but also for the cities that they go on to serve. And there are lots of things to say about the challenges of employability in places like Cornwall. I would just say very, brief pen picture, very characterised by small and medium enterprises, micro businesses, sole traders. So we don't have big employers in the way that other parts of the country do. Huge regional disparities. I don't think we even have the soundbite of levelling up anymore, do we? So we've failed as a country to address the big gaps that exist in income and all kinds of associated life outcomes. And a lot of investment in supporting regional economies, whether that's physical infrastructure, devolution deals, innovation funding, tech investment, all of that kind of stuff, disproportionately favours what we call the sort of policy corridor of cities, sort of through the middle of the country. It doesn't really touch the edges. And we also have challenges around, and I'll talk particularly around the challenges around health, because that's the focus of my current work. And I think quite often it's missing from the debate, actually, when we think about young people and their support to access employment. So in the area where I live, 1 in 3 school children are persistently absent from school, which means they're missing at least a day a week. And that's our future workforce, and in the really near future as well, in like a few years, they're working age adults. So it's perhaps not surprising that we also have above average levels of young people who are not in education, employment or training. We're well above the national average on that, and it is a national challenge. And this is obviously bad for businesses that want to grow. It's absolutely terrible for people's health, because long-term worklessness basically means you're going to live in poorer health and die earlier on average. And the financial cost is huge. So someone who's not in work in their 20s is going to lose around £1 million in lifetime earnings and cost around a similar amount to the state. So this, we very often, when we think about young people, we think about skills and technical qualifications, and we forget about health and the emotional resilience to go to school, to go to work, to stay in and succeed in those environments. So it's been wonderful. I've had the pleasure of delivering the Work Well programme as one of 15 pilot areas, which is a coaching and support service for people whose health makes work a struggle, and that's available for people 16 plus. Still not, but it does mean that critical 16 and 17-year-old age gap that's often missed can get support through that programme. We find young participants very often it's much more prevalent levels of neurodiversity that are their main struggle. So there's a real question about how well equipped our institutions are to support young people with their health and with neurodiversity as part of that. So I think the kind of SEND reforms that the government's consulting on are really important, but they're not going to be enough on their own, and they don't come into force until 2030. So there's a bit of what can we do right now, and in practical terms, just trying to build Work Well. Both we have a mental health app as part of the offer and the coaching and support into the student offer is something practical that we are trying to do in Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. So we're working with a local college, which was featured by Charlie Mayfield on the Today programme, which is also using data analytics to identify students who are at greater risk of falling out of their studies or not progressing into work. and to give them resilience training to help them go on. And that's not a technical qualification or a formal qualification, but it's making a real impact. And some of the insights they've got from that programme, that they found that young women were leaving college with better qualifications and much less likely to go into work than their male peers. And when they looked into why, it's because young women were much more likely to feel obliged to go and care for the older members of their family who are in poor health. So we've got a kind of double whammy of this challenge of ill health in our population. We have older workers with increasingly complex and multiple health challenges who aren't being supported to stay in work. And that is placing an unpaid caring burden on young adults, particularly young women, who are then not making the progress and transition into their own future employment. So I think that there's just, I've talked for too long, apologies, but I do really feel that this there's a really important need to focus on work and health as a whole life conversation. It doesn't start, when you turn 16 or 18. And too often we silo policies into children and young people, working age adults and older people. And health, obviously, the foundations take us all the way through our lives. So, yeah.
Great. Yeah, there's plenty more to say on that intersection of health, welfare, education, I think, which it will be great to get into a bit more as the panel goes on. But first of all, Oliver, you've been working with the EY Foundation on some of those projects. We've heard about the kind of internal motivation and so on. I think you're working a bit more on the system stuff, and that's related to the Flourish platform. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, so I think one risk of this debate, when we're kind of talking about the number of people who are NEET at the moment, it's over 1 million now in the UK, which is really higher than it's ever been. It is a huge concern. I think there is a risk that we kind of individualise something that is a kind of structural challenge. So that's something we've been really conscious of through all of the work we've done on this. We've drawn on at the Institute something called the capabilities approach, which comes from Amartya Sen, an economist who got a Nobel Prize a number of years ago looking at kind of welfare economics, and our colleague Magda Safir here built on that work. And really, I guess that the kind of idea behind that is that the capabilities approach focuses on people's, in this case, young people's ability to do things they have reason to value. So the kind of value bit there is very much linked to what Ewan was just speaking around about, things that people kind of inherently enjoy, things that people can kind of really see the kind of purpose of. They attach their own kind of motivations and goals to some sort of broader mission. The opportunities bit, I think, is very much related to that systems piece, which I think is a more complex one. I think the session earlier today touched on some of those points around pathways, but I think there's a level deeper there that we've been able to go in through working with kind of Jessie and the team in Cornwall, and really taking a kind of place-based approach to this. So again, I think that the labour market is often talked about as a kind of UK labour market, but in practice that is experienced as almost always as a local labour market. And if we go somewhere like Cornwall, obviously just the nature of the kind of rurality that Jessie was just mentioning, things like kind of travel, the availability of buses, all of these things become really, really practical constraints. So even if there is an opportunity somewhere, even if someone wants to do that, actually in practice, kind of each person, each individual, all of us have kind of different, as Martin Sen would say, sort of resources that we're able to draw on to make use of that opportunity. So I think really kind of understanding those, I think it's a kind of important policy challenge that I think is going to involve bringing together a large number of different partners. So I think that includes things around kind of transport and housing, kind of very importantly, but it's also going to involve kind of college leaders, career advisors. We think career advisors have a kind of huge role to play in this ecosystem, and I think play absolutely critical roles in this, but are often kind of under-resourced. I mean, some colleges have 3,000 or 4,000 students. There may be 1 or 2 career advisors at most, maybe at some of these organizations, which is obviously not very long to be, working really closely with people. And they often don't have the tools to be helping each young person, for example, go to work experience in a kind of given location, possibly have some kinds of funding that would enable them to take part in an apprenticeship or something like that. So we've kind of surfaced a lot of those challenges, and by working with young people, have been able to, I think, identify a lot of newer kinds of interventions, some of those digital, some of those policy interventions that we're kind of starting to unpack and explore. I think just building on that point around agency, this has been touched on a bit today, and I think just one point I would add on that from a kind of systems point of view is really, as policymakers or educators, we can nurture this. We can't necessarily kind of give it to someone. So we can create the space and conditions that their ability to take advantage of certain opportunities, or them being there in the first place. But I think I really think we need to move towards a skill system that is less about kind of implanting skills on people and more about kind of nurturing their opportunities in a way, and also inspiring them to be able to, and providing them the confidence to take advantage of them.
Yeah, I'm really interested in this idea of agency, and it's come up in previous panels as well. One of the things that, really strikes me with what you're saying, but also the question of kind of young people feeling they have control over their career. I think when we're dealing with AI, certainly when I speak to young people, I really don't know what to tell them in relation to what a career pathway looks like. And the experience of feeling like something is done to you is all the more kind of acute when you're looking at a landscape in which you're being told jobs are being erased, they're changing, but aren't necessarily being given any answers about what that's actually going to look like. I wonder, Anne-Marie, if you've got any thoughts on how perhaps employers or skills providers, even kind of careers advisors, are usefully mapping out some of the pathways that young people can take, and how that relates to the sense of agency and kind of awareness and understanding of what a career might look like and how they can take control, I suppose.
It's not, amongst many other things for young people, it's not being done very well at the moment. Careers advice is something that, if you spend enough time in any room talking about this, we end up talking. I always say connections. I don't know, it kind of ages you a little bit. I don't know if folks remember connections. There were connection cards, right? I remember at 13 doing a career survey that then told me I'd be a systems analyst or a management consultant. And then there was also points. I think I got money off my shopping at Topshop on the that weekend because of the connections card, right? And it was great. That was the heady days of great careers advice and a great kind of invested system. So I think that we're definitely missing out on that. But I think it's harder now because things are changing so quickly, and because a lot of the pathways just aren't there. I think there's also that piece of employers, they don't have as many graduate and entry level roles at the moment available in the market. And so then the onus and the incentive really to do a good job at then defining those pathways and giving people agency in that is not something that we see for young people, nor is it something that we see further up for all the people that are working. And so I think it's become almost optional for us to do that in the right kind of way, whereas that's not great, and we're storing ourselves up kind of at quite a big revolution, revolt. I don't know what it's going to end up being, right, when these young people end up coming in and seeing that this was substandard and wasn't really good enough for the types of agency they could have. With Stemettes, what we're doing to help folks understand kind of the awareness and the pathways is kind of we're able to leap and look a little bit ahead and say, if we look at folks that are already in the sector, already out of the sector, already moving and kind of working, there's such a diversity of roles and pathways that we're able to kind of build up a sense of there's going to be many ways for me to get to a couple of destinations along a journey, rather than saying my career is wherever I want to end is the destination and that's the end of it. So I think that's one thing that we're helping folks unpick through talking to role models, talking to folks that are kind of employed at the moment. But the other thing that we're looking, which maybe doesn't speak too much to what we've got kind of represented on the panel, is the options that they have across the field. So we're specifically STEM and STEAM, science, technology, engineering, maths, and art and design as part of it. And we're looking at entrepreneurship, academia, and industry as options. And it's been really heartening for young people, because entrepreneurship is much more about the agency when you have the resources and the resilience and all the rest of it. And it's been really heartening to see folks now see the transitions and manage that and feel a little bit more agency over the transitions they might have of if they work with us with a particular company, on a particular activity, they go into that company, but alongside it they've got kind of a side project, and then I get a call 10 months down the line asking about funding for whatever they're doing in their startup, and actually not funding, but which VC should they go with? And I'm thinking, hang on a second, you just said at the beginning of the call you quit your job. Why did you quit your job? And so I think there are ways that we can open this up, but there is something about, is this evenly distributed? And there are certain types of young people that might have gone through particular experiences that know that this is about their agency and this is about the choices that they make. And there are others where generationally that's not been what it is, because also we know a lot of people who also would be afraid to go off and become entrepreneurs, right? Or for whom the barriers actually seem way too high for them to go into academia, to go and explore something, have the depth. And then also, leaving academia and coming into industry is pretty easy. Going from industry into academia, again, that's another panel for a whole nother day. So I think, are we doing a good job was your original question? No. Are we leaning into the agency of it? No. And there's something to be said that the system relies on folks also not feeling that sense of agency to hold people accountable to make things better for them kind of across their career journey.
Yeah. Gabriel, I wonder what your experience of that idea of agency has been as someone who's kind of close to the beginning of his career.
Yeah, I found it quite difficult, to be honest with you. I think what's most difficult is the whole notion that you need to have experience to get experience, that kind of paradox where they expect you to have experience, but then nobody else is offering you experience. And I feel like, especially for young people from low-income backgrounds, their barriers are so high that they might not have the access to certain technologies. For example, people say that young people need to be upskilled in these new technologies. Well, a lot of the time, people from low-income backgrounds might not even have access to a tablet. I know when I was growing up, we had one computer and it was my father's computer, and we all used that computer. So I think it's quite difficult nowadays, especially because there is so much uncertainty. So like you were saying, for careers advisors, you don't actually know what to tell a young person going through, situations as such. So yeah, that's my experience with that.
And Jessie, does it look different in I'm kind of almost loath to say it, peripheral economies?
leading edge. Well, as you were speaking there, I was just thinking of part of our learning in Cornwall is careers advice is too late, really. So this whole when do children's ideas of their identity and what the opportunities for people like them get fixed, and it's really in primary school. So if you're living in a community where you don't see a lot of people doing a lot of different jobs, and you don't see, you know what you see, don't you? And perhaps no one's ever believed in you, and perhaps you don't have a sense of confidence in your own strengths or a sense of your own capability. That really is these are the foundational factors in life success, and they get fixed at a really early age. So we have a brilliant social enterprise in Cornwall, run by an amazing female entrepreneur called Tech Girls, and she got really concerned. She works in the tech industry. She got really concerned at the lack of women and girls, and she wanted to do something about this. And so she set up a social enterprise, started in secondary schools, very quickly realised that's too late. By then, girls have decided that isn't for them. So they work with primary school aged children, so for example, during the G7 in Cornwall, we managed to get a bit of money off government to take every school child in Cornwall to see Spaceport Cornwall and to see the opportunities in our space and satellite industry, because a lot of kids only see farming and hospitality and, you know, labouring or, you know, construction work or whatever, and they don't see that there's all of this other potential for them. So I would just say careers advice is too late. I think that's the key thing. But the whole focus on building agency, so the main non-health related barrier that people who come to work while looking for support bring is confidence, lack of confidence. And a lot of that gets fixed quite early in life. And then it can take its knocks as we go through life as well, can't it? But yeah.
Yeah, please.
Just, it's obviously not to downplay the challenges, but I think there is opportunity here as well, and like just the specifics of careers advice. I mean, careers advice, certainly from when I had it, could be so much better now with the technology that's available. I mean, you could find out about like any job, you could have, you know, like virtual work experience, you can kind of like the one-to-one tuition, you can kind of, there's loads of things that could make things materially a lot better for young people. But I think again, there's that inequality of opportunity there, and so like we see, you know, within the education system, the schools that are really leaning into tailored tuition, AI-based tuition, aren't the state schools at the highest levels of, you know, free school meal eligible young people. The careers support that's harnessing and leaning into technology aren't those schools, and so there is a question of intent and like how much do we want to use what is now available so that all young people have those same opportunities to succeed. And if there isn't if we don't act, if we just let things play out, then what will happen is kind of what's happening now, and it's a moment for greater inequality, but there's no need for that to be, that's not like preordained that has to go in that direction. But I just think at this point there needs to be a deliberate and act of intent to sort of ensure that we use what's now available, the new technologies that are coming online, to open up opportunity, and that is totally within our gift, but it won't happen unless we choose to make it happen, which is kind of I guess our concern, but also where we see opportunity, because if we do lean into this, if we do make those opportunities available for everyone, then this could be a really positive moment.
Oliver, actually, I wonder, and obviously this is open to the rest of the panel as well, if you had sort of specific thoughts on education and how this comes up into it. I mean, I think there's a lot of focus at the moment on graduates and whether university is the kind of optimum route for a lot of young people to reach employment. The FT reported today that Alan Milburn would be criticising the sort of over-focus on universities, and I was interested in that report that it sort of said that 1 in 10 NEETs are now graduates, which actually seemed quite low to me, but that we know of all sorts of sort of quite alarming figures around 140 graduates for every job. And from the graduates I speak to, at least, it's pretty tough out there. What kind of are those structural errors or issues in terms of where we focus education budgets and training for young people, and what are the levers we can pull to make things better?
Yeah, that's. I mean, it's a big question. I think I would still come back to my kind of earlier point about this being some sort of issue with the kind of young people necessarily. I don't see it that way at all in terms of the skills. And I think that, you know, there's clearly some kind of broader macro factors we've kind of touched on around this transition we're in related to AI. Even for the employees that, even for the firms that are kind of saying they're reducing roles because of AI, that's not necessarily because they are actually automating those roles. Some are kind of anticipating future demand. Some of this gets into kind of internal office politics and various things around, you know, kind of narratives about efficiency, for example. But that's going to vary by sector and role and everything else. I think that through the our partnership with the EY Foundation on the Motivating Futures project and also the Flourish project, we focus very much on this, as kind of Jessie was alluding to, this school to work transition, or kind of education to work transition. Like from our perspective, whether this be about kind of moving into an apprenticeship, moving from a university course into a job, that kind of transition has some kind of consistent challenges that I think are leading to kind of different kinds of labour market frictions, essentially. So Chris Pisarides, one of IFOW's co-founders, he got his Nobel Prize for talking about there being, introducing the idea of labour market frictions, which are broadly speaking geographic, information, and skills. So the skills bit is the bit that I think that people focus on, obviously, quite a bit. That I think needs to be unpacked quite a bit in terms of kind of whether that's more about the human-centric skills that Anne-Marie was talking about earlier, things like kind of critical thinking, creativity. I think people do learn those some degrees in apprenticeships, so it's often about how those are communicated, or about how the employer can assess them. Obviously on the technical skills side, there has been some kind of more change there, and I think we still have a lot of gaps in people's ability to demonstrate their existing skills they already have. So I guess that's where things like micro-credentials and sub-modules and things to do with courses can be effective on that side. I think the government's, in terms of kind of interventions, I think the government's youth guarantee announcement and pilot, I think that is a welcome thing. I think that's an example of something that's a tangible intervention that's aiming to kind of reduce those early frictions between moving into a full-time role and then kind of sustaining in that role. I think it could still be, I think there's still kind of room for improvement there. I mean, it's kind of early days. I think particularly the bit that's missing there is kind of ensuring that people are moving and being supported to moving into good jobs that they value rather than just kind of any job. And I think that's been one of the challenges with how our kind of employment support system has functioned. The last point I would maybe add is around how we think about kind of career advice, and I think certainly we've spent quite a bit of time looking at international examples, best practice, things in for example Finland, Estonia. Estonia has something called a kind of hobby schools, effectively, where they're kind of almost out of school clubs and also kind of youth there's central government funding for kind of youth facilities, effectively related to particularly helping people identify things they want to do in the economy and how they would like to add value in the economy. And I think the big thing that comes out there, which is related to some of the conversations earlier at the firm level, is kind of participation and doing things kind of with people rather than to people. Because advice almost inherently implies there's an organization or someone with information and that's being imparted to someone else. Whereas I think co-design and kind of working with people, giving people experience. I completely agree with Gabriel's comment earlier about kind of people not having experience. So I think this catch-22 is a huge problem. I think the job guarantee goes some way to help there, but I still think there's a kind of real need for almost career advice or career education really moving towards both inspiration programs, but also opportunities to kind of show people skills in different ways and develop sort of practical on-the-job skills that enable them to sort of translate what they already know into a specific workplace context.
Anyone else? Any further comment on the education front?
It's not necessarily an education point, but it's a build on yours there, Oliver. I think the role of social networks generally, so I think Gabriel's point was a bit around there's social capital. A lot of jobs are found through word of mouth rather than advert. A lot of internships or job shadowing opportunities are found through those kinds of networks. The ability to work unpaid or to live in someone's house while you do something isn't open to everybody. I'm going to misremember the name of the book. The amazing Hilary Cottam's book included lots of examples of kind of radical redesign of public services. And in the one where she based herself in a job centre and there was a sort of, if you want to try something different, come through this door, and the people came through the door. A lot of the focus there was on getting them to not just approach this challenge as an individual, but to actually build their relationships within a group and to talk about what they wanted to do. And the group could then sort of moderate, maybe that's a bit of a push, or what about this, so even just within the existing community, simply networking people better or supporting them to develop human networks helped them to get into employment and jobs. So So I think we could think more creatively about how we support human network building within the places that people are, because it does make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And brings us quite nicely on to opening up to questions from the audience. We've got about 15 minutes. Aha, wonderful. Okay, I'm quite close to read, but yeah, let's start with the top one. What should young people do to keep up if the education system is slower to change? Perhaps this is a little bit bringing it back to the individual responsibility that we had discussed. But I mean, Gabriel, do you think that there's kind of specific steps that young people can take to make things better, to give themselves a kind of leg up themselves?
Yeah, I think so. Just alluding to what you were saying, I think it's about those soft skills, like being able to learn those soft skills and being able to communicate with people who are your senior or who are in positions where you want to be is really crucial. And at a secondary school level or any education level, there's not much emphasis on how to actually do that. So, you know, you might have a degree, but you might walk into a room full of people who are where you want to be, but you don't know how to communicate to them. You don't know how to, you know, ask them for experience, ask them for advice, and speak to them on a level which you can actually extract value from that conversation. So I would definitely say that as a young person, one of the biggest skills that people should be, you know, striving to do is to learn those soft skills, because at the end of the day, if the job market is how it's looking, and like you said, it's word of mouth that actually, you know, finds you that job, those soft skills are going to be really important. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, someone also asked a question about how to kind of credentialize those soft skills, which I thought was quite interesting. Does anyone have any thoughts?
I know that's being looked at. We're doing some work, a little bit of work with LinkedIn, and they sort of recognise this issue, and they're ones that actually, to us as a charity, were first sort of brought to our attention around the way they see recruitment. The movement in the recruitment market is towards the softer skill, these sort of human skills, but to be able to measure those, that is something I think they're sort of looking at in terms of how you would demonstrate that on a profile. And so while there isn't I don't think there is a solution to that at the moment. I think that is increasingly being recognised as something that does need to be formalised, I think, really. So it's not an answer to the question, but just agreement that I think that's an important thing that needs to be. At the moment, it kind of really plays into the point of who you happen, the work experience you may have happened to have got, the people you may have happened to have met, and so it's not a fair way of demonstrating that at the moment.
Core skills. Every time you said soft, it scratched me a little bit. I think to reframe the question, it's unfair for us to say what should the young people be doing. I think, as we've said already, it's about the system, and I think it's about it's incumbent on all of us, the responsibilities that we have as people who have young people within our sphere of influence and have influence over what their experience is and what they're able to gain, to ensure that we're giving them as many opportunities as possible to nurture those core skills, to explore those core skills, and to be able to talk about them and display them in different spaces. I mean, I think the consulting world has done really well on this kind of skills-based type interviewing versus competency-based interviewing, where folks are able to communicate and talk through those examples of where they have. But I think it's important for us to help young people see, like, if we take this asset-based and this equitable approach, for them to see that doing scouts or playing that sport or taking on extra responsibilities in school as a, you know, form monitor or whatever it might be, those are all things that add up, that it doesn't have to be that you've gone to a workplace and done a particular thing that counts and that's of value. And so I think as much as we can lean into that and do that on behalf of our young people, I think that's the responsibility that we have, versus telling them that they need to do something differently for the current version of what we think the workplace looks like, because these are lifelong skills that they should be nurturing. I think controversially, DFE however long ago it was, kind of added oral C as something they're wanting schools to kind of draw out and do. And I think there are bits like that where we draw out where that already happens in their English curriculum, whether it's about communication, where that already happens in kind of arts curriculum. How do we make sure we've got that in computing curriculum now that we're going to have compulsory to Key Stage 4 that actually, fingers crossed, this time will actually happen? It's about us amping those up and saying that that's as important and that is a skill and that's something to be recognised and that's something employers will want. And so I think it's us, you know, joining up those dots on behalf of the young people rather than getting them to do something. There's a great question at the top that I'd love. I mean, it says, are panellists concerned that the UK government is funding edtech companies to develop AI tutoring programs? Doesn't this undermine the value of human teachers, and shouldn't the money go towards actual teachers and physical infrastructure? A round of applause for the person that asked this question. What I think is funny about this is it Salman Khan, the Khan Academy guy? I think in the last couple of months has come out and said I was all wrong about AI taking over teachers, which I think is hilarious because he ran Khan Academy and is very much a technologist. And technologists never seem to, these days, admit out loud when they're wrong on particular things. But even as someone that's so close to teaching and helping young people in an equitable way, right? Young folks that have been kind of failed by the system, it's been really interesting for him to reflect on teaching isn't just about, I give you the knowledge, right? There's communication, there's feedback, there's a loop, there's connection that goes on as part of it. And so we can invest all that we want into these AI platforms. I mean, I almost said it actually, Ewan, when you were talking earlier about using AI to help with careers advice. It's like, well, actually it's not purely about what the AI can do. Careers advice still needs listening, understanding, caring, communicating, collaborating, critical thinking. Right? You still need those things that AI's not been able to do. And so, yeah, it's a shame that the government's going to dump even more money into this, even though we're still trying to figure out the frameworks for how to do this in a way that's equitable. And you have to break a few eggs, right, to make an omelette. But it's going to be interesting to see whether it's omelette or something entirely different that they have that comes out of the money that's been invested in edtech platforms at the moment. But I think it's this whole thing around technology of, it's not just about technology, it's about how it's deployed and where it's used, and whether enough thought has gone into that kind of at the beginning of this process. I'm not convinced. So I'm worried for now that the money's gone into it, but I'm not worried at all about human teachers or the need for human teachers to disappear. I think that's one thing that the economists can agree on, that teaching is not a sector. It's not one of those jobs that the robots are going to come and take anytime soon.
Thanks very much. We're pretty much out of time. I am going to ask everyone on the panel, perhaps. Oh, is this green one one that we have to answer? No. Okay. Just for final thoughts, very, very briefly, because we've had a very wide-ranging conversation. But one of the questions that kind of I always get asked is around AI and what it's going to mean for entry-level jobs and what that means for young people. And so I'm simply going to ask, are you kind of optimistic or pessimistic about that at the moment? I'll start with Gabriel.
I'm 50-50, to be honest with you. As long as it gets diffused properly and it's equitable for all people, and low-income students can access that education and that AI, then for sure. But otherwise, I don't know.
Very good.
I tend not to think about things in that specific way, because I think it's, I guess as very much as Anne-Marie just said, we all have a role in this, and I think it's ultimately going to be about, decisions we take either in companies or within the policies and as voters as well. I do have concerns in the kind of short term around the transition to do with this, but I do think we also have the kind of policy tools that can make a big difference. And in many cases, we do either have examples of what works, or we know what works already within the UK in certain contexts. And I think longer term, I would say more optimistic. But I really think it's going to have to be about kind of centering kind of agency, particularly thinking about kind of young people's voice, taking that a lot more seriously. Even picking that example of the kind of edtech tool you mentioned, which is lots to say about that I agree with Anne-Marie on as well. But there's versions of that could be more done in a co-design way, either with educators or with students. So I think we have to move away from a kind of more top-down way of looking at it. And I think if we do that, then we can all be more optimistic.
I think it's easy to be pessimistic, but there is, it comes back to that point of, and it almost feels like coming to a sort of a critical moment of how much are we just going to sort of let it wash over us versus is it when we're going to get to that point of we do have agency. Certainly at the moment we still have agency in how AI technology more broadly is rolled out, and to look at what does this mean for people generally, which I think is like definitely not really, doesn't seem to be looked at, but particularly different groups of people, and ensuring that the way that we're using technology is used in a way that people want it to be used, and to support people, and so that the people have already being left behind aren't getting more left behind by this. And I think that is in our gift to look at it in that way, but I just don't think those questions are being looked at the level or with the level of focus that needs to happen.
Well, listen, I believe in hope. Hope is an act of resistance. It is not a passive or a naive act. And for me, I think back to, since the 70s, we've been talking about the real potential for technological advances to improve lives and work for all of us. The 3-day week is a perfect possibility. Productivity gains from AI, if we haven't really addressed in the debates today, the ownership of the means of production and the distribution of the rewards from AI. And that's fundamental to this. If the distribution of the rewards are fair, then we would free up the capacity of experienced humans in the workplace to do some absolutely amazing coaching and support to new entries into their workforce. At the moment, the system that we are working with, I think on another panel, talked about the intensification and extensification of work, and a loss of security and rights in that space. It doesn't have to be like that.
In the short term, I'm pessimistic, but there's that lyric, don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? So one day soon we're going to figure out what happens when you don't have entry-level folks in your organisation. What does that mean for future leadership? Yeah. What does that mean for innovation? What does that mean for understanding your customer? What does that mean for closeness to your supply chain? So, yeah, well, let's see how this goes, eh?
Thanks very much, and to all the panelists.